Very good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us on today's edition of The Big Story. I'm Afrida Rahman Ali. We're going to look at the issue of vaccine shortage and whether the shortage will be addressed anytime soon. From the statements coming out of the Serum Institute of India, it now appears that for the next 3 months, at least up to July, the shortages will continue. This Adar Poonawalla said in an interview with the Financial Times. Even as the country is witnessing an unprecedented surge, the shortage of vaccines around the country will remain at least till July. That's what the Serum Institute chairperson Adar Poonawalla had to say, warning that the shortage will continue for now till they manage to ramp up production. In an interview to Financial Times, Poonawalla said that production of Covishield doses will be increased to 100 million doses only by July from the current capacity of 60 to 70 million doses. And according to the Serum chief, the government did not expect the second wave to hit in January, and the company therefore never ramped up production to meet this kind of a demand since they did not have the orders coming in. On being dragged into the vaccine shortage politics, Serum chief said that the company is being wrongly framed by politicians and critics, and government is solely responsible for making the vaccine policy. The institute cannot be blamed for the shortages that the country is facing. Speaking on the vaccine export policy, Poonawalla added that foreign governments have now sued the company for failing to deliver on time after India placed restrictions on exports of the vaccine. So clearly there is a lot of issues with the vaccine policy, whether it's with the pricing issue or with the issue of supplying adequate vaccine to the states. Many of the states in India are yet to start the third round of the immunization program for the age group of 18 to 44. In fact, let me introduce Dr. Harshal R Salve, Associate Professor, Center for Community Medicine of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi, joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Salve, for giving us your time. I want to begin by asking you that at a time like this, where one of the major weapons that the country is using to fight this invisible enemy is the use of the vaccine. Now, there are a lot of stumbling blocks at the moment that the country is facing. What, according to you, is the magnitude of the problem? Do you feel that unless we ramp up the vaccination, there is no other way that we can combat this kind of a surge of coronavirus?
Yeah, thank you for having me on show. Vaccine is the one of the strategy which can be used for combating this peak, I will say, and the pandemic in a large extent. Yes, there are various components of vaccination as such: the production, the generation, supply, distribution, and the utilization. So till I think in last 1 or 2 months, we have addressing the issue of hesitancy in terms of increasing the utilization of the vaccine. There still remains the issue of distribution, the supply. You have very well highlighted the challenges posed by the companies, which has been seen due to this unprecedented spike in the cases. Yes. And that definitely lead to the some necessity and at sort of demand that increase the demand of vaccine, I will say, due to those increase in the cases in the community. So that's a one part. Second part, yes, I agree the vaccine is an important component, but during this peak time, I will say the most important thing is cutting the transmission. How we can cut the transmission? It is well known by this now that universal mask use, stopping the gatherings, and indoor use of mask and keeping the ventilation. That is a very important, because what's happening during this peak is most of the transmission is happening inside the house, inside the closed spaces. And the recent evidences are coming up that COVID is airborne. It is aerosol which is also contributing to the transmission. So in such scenario, the indoor transmission becomes very critical, in increasing the spiking of the cases. So yes, vaccines are important, but during the peak time, I will say the cutting of the transmission by universal mask use, stopping the indoor transmission is the key. Of course, the vaccination is ongoing and continued, that we all agree to it.
Right. Dr. Salve, if you go through the inputs that are coming on this from various experts, and people use interesting analogies, and one of the analogies is that the vaccine is like the seat belt and the helmet. It may not prevent an accident, but at least it can protect you. So under the circumstances, given the shortages that the country is facing, how are we going to cope up with this? Are we saying that some people will have to do without the helmet and without the seat belt? Isn't that going to pose a far greater risk? Would we not be better off if we had managed to vaccinate the adult population in the country?
Yeah, it is easier said than done in the country like India, where we have a challenge in terms of geographical challenge, in terms of demographic challenge. So, vaccine works only after the stipulated amount of time. Let's say the 2 week, two doses, 1 month apart, and after that 24 days or 4 weeks, we say 24 days to 28 days. After that, the real effect of
Okay.
vaccine comes. You are rightly put it up that vaccine doesn't stop the infection acquiring, but it stops the severity of the infection. It stops the hospitalization. So, in a sense, so far we are able to vaccinate a chunk of population, particularly healthcare workers, predominantly and the frontline workers. So that my assumption is that stopped the hospitalization and the severe disease among this population. But I will say that since we have started vaccination in the month of January, we have pushed the right button in terms of prioritizing. Obviously, we were facing the shortage of the supply and other challenges, but we have prioritized the population which we have to vaccinate, starting from the healthcare workers, the frontline workers, and then the high risk population, that is elderly and more than 45 years population. So that we have seen in last 4 months of time. Now the government have widened the scope of vaccination for everyone above 18 years of age. Of course, the you will see in the terms of numbers, it is a
But Dr.
huge.
Salve, widening on paper is one thing, and then actually getting the immunization drive started is quite another, because the government policy on this has been that for the age group of 18 to 44, the states now must take responsibility. They must directly procure from the manufacturers. The manufacturer, as you would have heard Adar Poonawala saying, did not envisage this kind of a demand. They did not augment the production of the vaccine to the extent that they could meet this demand. Those advanced orders were never placed. Do you see a failure in policy in that sense in the government's envisaging the second wave to begin with? And then, even if irrespective of whether the second wave hit us or not, we should have been anyway planning to vaccinate the adult population, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is, and I'm sure that government is working on that direction. It is not that one fine day government has decided to vaccinate 18 years and above. So it is a strategy which has formulated over a period of time. I will say in the last year itself, because government policies doesn't formulate in a one day itself. Through the consultation, through the experts, it gets formulated. Of course, there is a challenge in terms of vaccinating, and as you rightly pointed out, now in the latest vaccination policy, government has given a free hand to the states to procure directly from the manufacturer, and they have free hand to also buy other vaccines, which is granted permission. You have noticed that recently the third vaccine which granted a permission, that is a Sputnik, has been arrived in India, and I'm sure it will be utilized and it will add
Yes.
to the basket of vaccine available.
No, I was
So yes,
asking
it's
you,
a
where do you think was the error of judgment that today we are in this situation? Was there a miscalculation? Was there an underestimation, sir, that today we are in this position where we have a demand for vaccine, the vaccine hesitancy has been done away with, people are queuing up outside vaccine centers, but there isn't enough stock. So somewhere the government has failed to do forward planning, you think, in the rollout of the vaccine policy?
I will say that if you see the surge of cases, it was sudden. It was never anticipated. If you see globally, the surge of cases in the second wave, it was not such a rampant. India is a sort of an exception, I will say. The surge was such a rampant, it was taken everyone aback, including the government and the policymakers. So, of course, there is a challenge, and you will see that the hesitancy got down because of the increase in the demand currently. Initially itself, when the vaccination drive started off, only 50%, 60% workers were vaccinated, even though they have been given sort of opportunity first. But now, because of the looming second wave and the seeing the
Yes.
sort of media, the people are coming up, including healthcare workers, frontline workers. So people are now coming up for the vaccination. Yes, vaccine development, it's not a sort of one day sort of job. It takes its own time. It takes its own sort of
Yes,
due
precisely
course.
what I'm asking you, Dr. Salve, that if the rollout was planned, if the vaccine rollout was planned based on some blueprint, based on some estimation of how the cases will surge, are you saying that in that calculation, the leadership somewhere failed to rope in all the factors, failed to envisage that the surge could happen to this level and extent? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying, it should have been looked into because ultimately we could have sort of took priorly. That's the way we prepare for a pandemic, and we have seen the multiple waves in other country. Though we could not have expected such a steep
Yes.
rise in second wave, but the second wave is sort of imminent, which is the nature of the virus, which bounce back to vulnerable population, and the mutations, which is natural in such cases of viruses, and COVID is not an exception. So that I think should have been
Yes.
included in the planning, particular the vaccine, and
But
given the
irrespective
scenario
of
that
that,
vaccine.
your population remains the same. You have those figures. You know how many adults are in the age group of 18 to 44, how many are there in the other age group. That estimate is not variable. So if you were anyway planning to vaccinate the entire adult population, why is it that today we are falling short of vaccines? That question remains, Dr. Salve, which we will of course continue to put to the authorities as well, along with the other question of the differential pricing policy. The states now are having a lot of difficulties in procuring vaccines on their own. The Supreme Court has also weighed in this entire issue. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon, Dr. Salve, for sharing your perspectives on this issue.